Our topic for this module is the ethics of the science of AI, specifically of large language models, neural nets, and the data and classification schema upon which they are built. We're going to read Kate Crawford's Atlas of AI, Power, Politics, and the Planetary Costs of Artificial Intelligence. Crawford's argument is that AI is neither artificial nor intelligent. As for its artificiality, Crawford, of course, doesn't dispute that it's man-made. In fact, it might be too reflective of its human originators. Instead, she challenges its artificiality by drawing our attention to its materiality and corporeality, all of the resources required to create and sustain AI, and all of the containers needed to house it. As for its intelligence, Crawford argues that it is not autonomous, not rational, and not able to do anything without extensive training on large data sets or highly proscribed and carefully prescribed rules and rewards. For Crawford, AI depends on a wide set of political and social structures and is ultimately designed to serve existing dominant interests, and thus can best be understood as, in her words, a registry of power. In other words, it isn't an independent entity with its own agency and power, but merely a reflection of the desires and power of those who control it. We saw in Drayton, through the story of Adam in the Garden of Eden, that the ancient relationship in Judeo-Christian culture between natural knowledge, our dominion over nature, and naming and classification. When the God of Abraham gave Adam dominion over nature, that dominion was primarily manifested through Adam's prerogative to name and order all the beasts of the field, fowl of the air, and fish of the sea. The medievalist historian of technology, Lynn White Jr., traced our unsustainable relationship with the natural world and our resources to this misguided sense of domination taught by Judeo-Christian ethics in his famous essay, The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis. The point, which is Crawford's thesis for this chapter on classification, is that classifying things, known formally as taxonomy, is always an expression of power. There are inherent and inevitable power imbalances between the classifier and the classified. Moreover, classification requires simplification. Every classifying act involves the reduction of the rich complexity of the human and non-human world, the cosmos itself, to something countable, computable, containable, translatable, tradable, commodifiable. That which is classified is harmed in the process, and the unruly beauty of reality is replaced with the ever duller echo of simulation, approximation, and probability distribution. You'll learn from Crawford about ImageNet, a computer vision enterprise, which in order to teach computers to see and be able to identify what they're seeing, had to create boxes to place all of the potential images in, including boxes for every supposed type of person. This is a very old enterprise. You'll find if you turn to the history of science. In their colonies in the Americas, the Spanish were hyper-conscious of racial mixing and precious about their own racial purity as they interacted with the indigenous people they conquered and enslaved under the encomienda system, and the Black Africans they enslaved and transported to their colonies. They created highly specialized racial categories, each with their own name, for every possible combination of Black, Indigenous, locally born white, and European born white. These categories are represented in what are known as casta paintings. Just to give you one quirky or nonsensical example, the term Chino, which means Chinese in Spanish, refers to the offspring of either a Lobo and an indigenous person or a Lobo and an African person, with a Lobo, meaning wolf in Spanish, referring to the offspring of an indigenous person and an African person. So, just to recap, for those of you understandably struggling to follow such nonsense, a member of the so-called Chinese caste in colonial Spanish society was either 25% African and 75% indigenous, or 75% African and 25% indigenous. Even though there were strong social pressures to operate within your racial ambit and to climb rather than fall down this arbitrarily constructed racial hierarchical ladder, marrying outside of one's caste was generally legal in colonial Spain. This was not the case in apartheid South Africa, however, which attempted to legally circumscribe race into just 4 categories: white, Asian, by which they meant South Asian, of which there was a large population in South Africa due to their shared British colonial history. Third, what they called colored, what we would call mixed race or biracial, and indigenous, which in Southern Africa obviously meant Black. In apartheid South Africa, Racial mixing or miscegenation was illegal, as many of you may be familiar with from the comedian Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime. Since Noah is biracial South African, born to a black mother and a white father in 1984. The unruly diversity and multiplicity of the world is difficult to legislate or police out of existence. As the philosopher and historian of science and technology studies Donna Haraway reminds us, the capital P, capital T pure type always eluded the classifiers. It kept slipping through and endlessly multiplying all the typological taxonomies. As Trevor Noah's existence and the ludicrous multiplication of typologies are a testament to, the classifiers can never capture, suspend, or pin like butterflies in a shadow box, to borrow from Crawford, the typologies they wish to control because the panoply of humanity is unmanageable, constantly resisting control. But just because human diversity is always rendering attempts to catalog it obsolete does not mean that those categorizations aren't capable of causing great harm in the meantime. There is a binary racial category scheme in the Great Lakes region of Africa, in the countries of Burundi and Rwanda, that divides everyone into either Hutus or Tutsis. The origins of this racial category system are disputed, and different phenotypical markers have been used over time to place people into one of these two artificial ethnic groups. But perhaps the most prolific catalogers of Hutus and Tutsis in history were the European colonizers, German and Belgian, who, on the basis of supposedly lighter skin or a narrower nose, privileged the Tutsi minority population over the Hutu majority. The fact that it was possible for wealthy Hutus to attain Tutsi status and identity cards demonstrates the artifice and malleability of these racial categories. There was a civil war in Rwanda that heightened racial tensions, and in the aftermath of that civil war, Hutu extremists called for an ethnic cleansing of the Tutsis who had been historically favored and empowered by colonizers. Between 500,000 and 1 million Tutsis were murdered by the Rwandan genocide. Make no mistake about the power of classification and the danger of misusing that power. This warning doesn't just apply to the tech bros who stand to profit off of it, telling us that AI is going to revolutionize our lives. Academics, historians included, frequently resort to classification to make sense of the mind-boggling amount of information they have to deal with as they attempt to understand humans in the past.